I would say I innately knew how to grow a business. The sales and revenue, marketing, brand building part is pretty intuitive to me. Yes, there's disciplines behind those that are like, but that part comes very naturally to me. The building the operational infrastructure so that growth has really solid platform to build off of was less obvious to me. And so yes, we went through a period of time where we were growing a ton.
I'm Matt Tate, founder of Decimal and fellow entrepreneur. Yes, I'm one of the crazy ones. I've chosen time and time again to hustle my way through that first million. Now, I'm scaling to the next 50. So I know firsthand what the messy middle is really like. And I know that entrepreneurs and leaders like us need a destination for empowerment, community, and encouragement. This is our place. This is After the First Million. All right, folks. Today I'm talking to Tiffany Sauder, CEO of Element 3, one of the fastest growing marketing agencies in the Midwest, and host of her very own podcast, Scared Confident. Voted as a 40 under 40 in 2018, leading Element 3 to multiple rankings in the Inc. 5000 list, Tiffany's entrepreneurial journey is a wild one. Aren't they all, though? Well, the answer is definitely yes. Tiffany has had the unique experience of building and growing a business during two economic crises, first the crash of '08, then the COVID pandemic, as well as raising a family and a couple of kids. It's safe to say that Tiffany's had a lot of experience in the messy middle, and then some, which is why I'm excited for you to hear her story. Tiffany, thanks for joining us.
Awesome, Matt. Thanks. I'm excited.
Me too. Well, to start off, I always joke that you have to be just a little bit crazy to run or start your own company. When did you realize that you were one of the crazy ones?
I think that I have always liked control and making decisions. Even with like my friends, I just like having a plan, and I am really good with a blank sheet of paper, an empty afternoon. I'm just like good with coming up with what to do, where to go, how to start. And I think that part of my personality is part of my crazy as it relates to like my entrepreneurial journey. But I also think I grew up with a dad that was very entrepreneurial. And so risk and crazy, I would say on the spectrum for like my childhood, I grew up in a lot of risk and I grew up around a lot of crazy, even though it was like a really small rural town in Indiana. So I think even my starting point for what is a big deal is like fairly high. Like it takes a
Yeah.
lot to cross that threshold. And so I think that's part of it too. I think I naturally have ideas that fill the space. And I think I grew up around a lot of risk. And so I almost don't feel what other people see.
Tell me more about that. So your dad had that kind of risk-taking entrepreneurial bent. What
Mhm.
exactly was he doing?
Up until when I was in third grade, I'm the oldest of four kids. My dad farmed, as you do, in small rural Indiana, largely agrarian environment. And he had an uncle that was an entrepreneur that I think began mentoring him. And he also just wanted more control. It's just in farming, you can do everything right. And if you don't get rain, it doesn't matter. And so he wanted to get into a world where he just had more than one shot a year, which is basically what it is in farming. So my dad started a pallet business, like wooden pallets, fork trucks, and they're the largest east of the Mississippi now. So it's today a really big company, but it was not that when I was a little girl. My dad was putting to get them together by hand, like in the shop on our farm property. He was delivering like partial semi loads because he didn't have the money to pay people to build all of them. So he would deliver the ones that he had done, and he knew how many they needed for like a single shift. And so that was like what I grew up around. You just figure it out. And there was no room for complaints or being tired. And I think that generally that has served me well. I've had to go to a little bit of counseling to realize that feelings do matter, but I grew up around a lot of hard work. So
I think that's part of our generation's journey is understanding balance
mhm,
and using it as a strength rather than a weakness.
mhm.
So you grew up in an environment that broadly encouraged or you saw success out of that taking risk. And as you and I know, having worked for a couple of years and had a lot of different people that we've worked with or worked for us. That's not necessarily a natural tendency. You enter your career, and how does that start to manifest itself in your journey?
Right out of college, I worked for a great big company. I worked for Lilly, which as a small town kid in Indiana, I don't know, where I grew up, that Lilly was like the ultimate. They were the largest one of the largest employers. It seemed very sexy from the outside. They had your key card, got you into a lot of cool places, and there was frozen yogurt for lunch, and it just seemed very cool to my 22-year-old self, and it is very cool. And I learned a lot working in a really big company. But I just started to see that it was gonna be a long time before I, like, had any real, like, authority or influence or the ability to make a decision, which probably for just cause. What do I know about making huge decisions on, like, medicine? But I just wanted to be in a place where I was more my decisions mattered. I could see if I was, like, winning or if I was failing. And I think that also really informed from my childhood. My dad never really celebrated the big wins that he had, and he also didn't cry real hard over the things that he got wrong. It was like a pretty steady journey in spite of this, like, wild entrepreneurial journey that we were on as a family for the first 10 years or so. And I think that, like, that also informed if it's wrong, that's fine. You just keep trying. And he would always say people just give up too early. They think that if they're on the right path, it's gonna be easy, that there's gonna be these signs of, like, success just shouting in your face. It's like the people who get there, if you read I love to read biographies and memoirs. Everybody had 3 or 4 times where they were, like, 1 quarter, like, literally 1 nickel short of being bankrupt, or 1 deal that didn't go through, or 1 contract. Like, it's like the margin of victory is so slim. And part of it is just continuing to say, I'm not done yet. There is more road that I can build. And I think I grew up around that fortitude in a way that was so cultural. I didn't know to see it as a kid. Like, I couldn't have explained it. It was just normal. But looking back now, you start to learn that people grew up with the illusion of a lot more security than I
Yeah.
grew up around. I just didn't know anything different.
You and I are both parents. And as we teach our
Mhm.
kids, we always teach them. My kids always joke when they fell off their bike as a kid. I would ask them, what do we do next? And they said, get back up. And there's so much to life and to business, as you just alluded to, in getting back up, in
Mhm.
saying, I'm not done fighting. So you are at Lilly and you decide that the box that a big company puts you in, which is great for a lot of people, but for a lot of us entrepreneurs, feels less freeing. And how did you take that next step? How did you have that courage to leave that big company and take that step?
I had very little to lose. I was like 24, 25 years old. And so I didn't have any financial obligations. I didn't have any kids depending on me. I was single at the time. I hadn't bought a house. I was renting an apartment. I was just like, I don't know. I have some space to screw this up. One of my favorite questions to ask, really anybody, but I would say people over the age of 60, is what advice would you give yourself if you were my age again? And in my informal poll of that question, resoundingly, the theme that I most hear back is I wish I would have taken more risk earlier in my life.
Hmm.
And I don't feel like I have to live with that regret, because I think, again, the gift of my childhood, like, I took a lot of risk in my 20s, which means not fitting in, which means not always having $80,000-$90,000 salary to fall back on, which means not taking vacations, which meant a lot of things. But we took a lot of risk, my husband and I did, in our 20s and early 30s. And I think because we didn't have a ton to lose, we were blessed in not having a bunch of student debt that we had. We just were like, played like we didn't have anything to lose, because we didn't.
Oh, that's great. So the next stage of your journey is element three.
Mhm.
And one of the really cool things for me is you've been building element three for 18 years, but that's almost 20 years.
I know, it's weird, weird.
What made you go from Eli Lilly to marketing? What was it that
Yeah,
you saw and wanted to build there?
I think the simple answer is I think it was a God thing. And so I was in finance at Lilly, which is really about looking at past performance, assessing what happened the way you thought it was going to and what happened that you didn't think it was going to happen, and interrogating variance and just getting better at predicting the future over and over again. That thinking model is very similar to marketing, especially 20 years ago. We were just like really getting introduced to email marketing and really like early stages trying to figure out what the internet was going to do for B2B marketing. And I was like, oh crap, I see this. Like, I now have the ability to make a plan, to execute against that plan, to like interrogate actuals against my plan, to get smarter in the variance and what's happening and to make better predictions about the future. So that like simple thinking model that I had been trained in all through college and then as a financial analyst at Lilly was a very easy lift for me to just put it on a new topic. Now, I didn't know anything about marketing. Really, I didn't take a marketing class. I had not sat in a marketing department. Like, all of those things are a little bit hilarious and terrifying. I think I had the discipline to learn it well because I knew how to set up some of those thinking models and begin to learn about the tactics. And now today, I'm still not the best tacticianer at marketing. I would say I'm a really good strategist, but like knowing how to log into the system, I was never amazing at that. But I feel like I really understood the strategy because I knew how to tie it to business. So that thinking model is what I saw in marketing. I was like, oh, this is coming. And I think that's one of my gifts, is being able to see around the corner. I don't know how I see it. I don't know where it comes from. I just can kind of see. And I saw this wave. I saw all this disruption that was going to happen to all these traditional agencies that had org charts and cost structures and leases they had to pay and like all this stuff, and executives who are trying to keep their job, and to be like, I'm starting from nothing. I get to architect a modern agency, a digital agency, whatever words we wanted to use, from a point of beginning. I'm starting inside of this information. I'm not having to figure out how to pivot into it. And so I think I had some advantage there too. I just could look at it differently. I was able to attract some talent that I absolutely had not earned because I was like, this is coming. Where you're working is not going to be able to teach you about what's coming because all of their revenue is off of what's been. And so unless they're going to take a bunch of profits out of their pocket and plow it into learning all the new stuff. And so I was able to attract talent that I definitely hadn't earned yet. And that helped the business certainly as well. So I don't know. I think it was timing. I think it was seeing a disruption that was coming. And I think it was what my mind had been trained to do and identify patterns and like kind of this thinking model that came from finance. I think it was perfectly timed for where marketing was going.
There's a lot to unpack there, but there are a couple of things that really stand out to me. Number one, in my 20 years of working, I have never heard somebody equate the finance brain to marketing. But it makes so much sense. I mean, that analytical ability, because typically you think of it as the creative. You think of marketing as the highly creative side of your brain, and the finance as being almost the entirely opposite side of your brain. But at the same time, to be successful, I would venture that a lot of that kind of structured strategic thinking, the ability to, as finance does, almost train you to also try to look around the corner, really has helped you to build element 3 into what is now that long-standing almost 20-year-old company.
Yeah, I always wanted the words finance on my resume, not accounting. I felt like accounting was all about looking backwards, and finance was having context of what happened in the past, but it was all about making good bets, running good tests, running financial models and scenarios to see what could happen. And I think I've always lived in the what could happen. I am just able to do it working from a place that's informed financially, so that then I can go to these amazing creative minds and play with them on what could happen. And in our business, we spend a lot of energy on financial literacy inside of Element 3 because it is a tragedy that alongside these design, marketing, UI, UX degrees is not financial literacy. Because if they're going to decide to do those things for commerce, for commercial purposes, they have to understand the sandbox that they're doing that in. And I think it was just like, I don't know how to think about them separately. And we do open book financials. We educate them on like gross margin and net versus gross and EBITDA and net income and what's depreciation, amortization, like all those, what's cost of goods sold, like all that kind of stuff is it important for the vocabulary of business? And when marketers do the work to understand the context in which we have to play, I think that's been part of our secret sauce to longevity.
You mentioned earlier that you were blessed and lucky enough to attract some top talent, and some top talent at a time where the opportunity itself in digital marketing, or whatever the industry change was that occurred in the early 2000s, being able to attract that talent is certainly an aspect of being able to grow a great team. But then you seem like you've matched that with the organizational transparency and upskilling on a different side of team. I'd love to hear more about your team. And those early years couldn't have all been easy
Mhm.
and couldn't have been always up and to the right. But talk about how much the team and building that culture in that team has impacted at least the early years, but probably the growth all the way through these last 18 years.
I think there's a certain, and you and I have talked about this like kind of off mic a little bit, Matt. There's this certain energy and magnetism and passion that a founder, I think, innately has, but has to have to be like, to get those first 25 customers, to get that talent in town that you just know is going to be a game changer in the way that you can build your team and see the world and the competency that you can bring to clients. And so I think I had to learn as I was attracting or convincing. It's over breakfast and lunches and passionate pleas and speeches about this is what we're doing and the difference we want to make and who I am as a leader and like what we're going to do. That's what it sounds like. But when they come, it was a combination of, I think, learning to do two things. One is to get out of their way. The one that's coming to mind in particular is when I hired Darren, our creative director, who just passed 10 years. He was like an institution in the agency landscape. He knew everybody. He had hired 50% of the designers in the city at some point in his career. I mean, he just like knew the footprint of the city. And I was like, I cannot get good creative talent to take me seriously because I was an outsider to the agency world. I didn't have a marketing degree. I hadn't worked at like a big marketing brand like Delta or something like that. Like I was a finance person trying to hack her way into a pretty exclusive club of people who are rightly protective of this industry. And so I was like, couldn't get people to take me seriously. And so when I talked to Darren, I said, I'm not going to teach you how to be a creative director. I'm not going to tell you what your team needs to look like. I'm not going to tell you who you need to hire. Like your job is to make us excellent. Your job is to help us win a best in show in the Indianapolis Addies. That was like my goal for him because I was like, then I will at least know I've beat out my backyard and then we'll go from there. And so I think you have to be inspiring. I think you have to know that they have to know they're going to be resourced and have the space to do their jobs well. But I think what I had to learn as I got older is what I had to offer them as well. Like it's one thing to be left alone, but people, if they're going to stay somewhere for a long time, want to feel like they're being invested in. And so I started to realize the currency I have that they haven't had access to is the financial brain. This acumen of what are our clients really thinking about? How do we get deeper into understanding what their major revenue and cost drivers are? How do we go have business vocabulary conversations with our clients to get us to a totally different level of trust instead of just staying in this creative space, like you were saying before? And that is, I think, why I've kept people. We've had a good run. They've been given the space to be successful, but I think they also feel like they are learning a ton. And that's part of, I think, comes from my DNA as a business person. So as you're building your culture, I think especially if somebody's listening to this that's a young leader, it can feel like, what do I have to offer? What do I know? I've never worked in an agency this size. I've said that every day of my whole career here. I've never worked at an agency this size before. I've never done this before. And so where do you have confidence in your competence so that you're still leading your leaders that may be way ahead of you in other areas of the business? I think that was a key part of me owning my own leadership as we matured and giving the people I hired the space to do well and also make sure they were still really learning and growing.
I'm interested in your thoughts on the depth of it. Do you think that's also part of the reason why your company has had success in an industry where you typically see a lot of people come in and out? or you see a
Mhm.
lot of consolidation, or people going from in-house to agency. You just have a lot of kind of transient nature to marketing as a whole, and yet you've been able to build a solid foundation of a company that has been successful through a lot.
I think you build what you believe. So the number of times people have told me designers don't stay at one place for more than 3 years. You will never have a high ENPS score as an agency. Everybody goes to agencies for a small period of time in their career to get a bunch of experience exposure. But once you have a baby, once you have a family, once you like want to be like a real adult, then the agency world is not like conducive to that. And so you go in house somewhere. And it's like kind of keep going. You're never going to be able to transition the agency to different leadership. You're never going to be able to do that. You built this agency and you're going to have to run it. When you're done running it, then the whole thing is just going to go away. Like the number of things I've been told about how bad of an idea this business is, my industry, the people who work in it, they're flaky, they're not loyal, they're only in it for themselves, they're building their portfolios, they don't really care about marketing. It's like, okay, like maybe I just don't want to believe that's true. And I think because marketing doesn't work for agencies, that's another one. Don't build an in house marketing team. You're going to be the one who gets all the business, Tiffany. Spend your time serving on boards, getting to know people in the community. Your phone will ring, but you'll never be able to create a sales channel, a marketing plan that actually generates revenue that you're not creating. If that's what you believe, then that's what you will build. And so, yes, we've had to spend a lot of money and a lot of time figuring out how to make all those things untrue for us. But I believed they could be untrue. I believed that designers, they don't want to not be loyal. They want to always be challenged. Me too. Okay, if we have that in common, how do I create an environment where they're always challenged? Designers are not going to want to be held accountable for results in campaigns. Okay, then don't work here. But if you want to see if your art is actually driving value and you get a chance to do it over and over and over and over again because that client trusts you more and more and more with bigger budgets, bigger campaigns, everything gets bigger and better when you have results, then maybe you teach them how to get comfortable with the risk that it feels like to be accountable for an outcome. Maybe that's what it is that they're like, I don't know how to feel like I have control in an environment where I'm asked for outcomes and all I'm doing is making pictures. Okay, let's teach on that. How do we test? How do we make educated guesses together? How do we build the sandbox so that you feel set up for success? How do we make goals that are incremental with the client so that you're not asked to have rainbows shoot out of the butts of ponies? You know what I mean? Like, how do we be thoughtful business partners with you? And that's what I learned is that the first thing that everybody said was true. They're not loyal. Marketing can't generate results, blah, 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 blah. It wasn't really the thing. You had to like keep digging. So I think that I've always wanted to build this thing for the long haul. We've tried to do right by people with a wide angle lens and not just serve the day and not just solve the problem like of the moment. And I think if any of these words make any sense at all, then that is what we've done.
You heard it here first. Rainbows do not shoot out of the butts of ponies.
That's right. Not from my agency, they don't.
On a serious note, one of the things that kind of resonates that out of everything you just said there, I was just trying to explain this to a 9-year-old. That was fun. I was telling my kids the other day that there are two types of people in the world. It's gross oversimplification, but I said there are those people that view never and always as an opportunity, and those people that view never and always as an answer. And at some point, those of us that kind of sit in this seat, it's almost like when people say you can never do that, we're like, okay, sure. I'm going to figure out how to, just to prove you wrong and then see if there's more to it. But I think there's a lot of that in summary to what you just said is that mentality of I'm going to do this differently because everybody else thinks that you can't.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I think that's right. Or asking yourself the question, if I could, how would I? Is the question I like, where would I start? How would I if I could?
It's a much more elegant way to put it.
No, I think it's the same thing. I just, yeah, this is different.
You have grown your agency and grown your company during some pretty tough times. And it's not just the outside tough times of the '08 crisis, which was fun for all of us, or the pandemic, which was harder in most ways, but also through growing a family and trying to balance out through there. Let's do the outside stuff first. You were what, 7, 8, 9 years into growing Element 3, and then '08 happened, and a lot of businesses started cutting spending. And as you and I both
Mhm.
know, marketing is one of the first areas that people cut. Talk about how you grew your agency, how you held everything together, how you grew as a person during that first crisis.
Yeah, so it was about 5 years into the journey that we hit the economic crisis. I was 29 years old. We had our first child in January of 2005, of January of 2009. I got married in '05. January 2009, so it was, like, in the middle, it was, like, maybe 60 days before the Lehman Brothers, Bear Stearns, all that kinda stuff blew up. It was, like, right there when we had her, and so I was supposed to be on maternity leave. I'm going through this pretty wild ride of becoming a mom for the first time. I think I'm a really good mom, above average mom to big kids. I am not as good in that first year. So it is like is personally not my favorite. It's really hard for me, not the best at it. And so I was realizing that your brain doesn't work, your body doesn't feel right. My business is collapsing in front of my eyes. In December of 2008, our revenue at that time was had passed $100,000 in 1 month for the first time ever. It was like a marker I had been working towards for pretty much the whole 4 years. I was like, if I can get to $1 million run rate, then I feel like we'll be kind of heading somewhere. And then in January, it was like $23,000. So it was a cliff. And I had her on the 15th of January. So it was a lot, and I didn't know what to do, and so I froze. And it's the worst possible thing to do is to be like, I don't know where to look. So I just froze. I didn't make any decisions. I just did not know what to do. And I was just hoping it would go away. And it didn't, as the financial crisis just kept going. Clients were like, yeah, we want to do the work. We're working through renewals, but we just don't know when we can say yes. We're waiting on our clients. And it became this daisy chain of just waiting. And so before I knew it, 3, 4 months had gone by. We've burned through $200,000 that we don't have. And I am trying to figure out what to do. Do I close this thing up? Do we have any clients even worth working on? My people were literally walking around with nothing to do, waiting for me to do something. Laying everybody off felt like the worst thing I wanted to do while I was on maternity leave. It was absolutely what I should have done, but it was just like, it just became this perpetual circular cell reference of, if I don't have my people, I can't deliver this work if it does come through. If I don't have this work, I can't afford my people. I don't know what to do. I guess I'll just stay home. It was just like terrible. So we ended up getting through it, but it took us like probably 18 to 24 months to pay everybody back that we owed money to. I paid every dollar of interest. I quite uncomfortably returned every phone call of somebody saying, when are you going to pay us? We still don't have payment for this. And it was like humbling and brutal. And I cried a lot. And I was pretty sure I was the worst business person on the planet at that time. And that was where my dad said to me, hard is not the end. It's just hard. It's not going to eat you. It's just really hard. And if you want to quit, it can be the end, but it doesn't have to be. And I think I read a lot of books during that time. The Hard Thing About Hard Things is one of my favorite books. And just to understand that if it's really hard, it doesn't mean you're necessarily on the wrong path. There's some things you might need to learn about from the situation you're in and what got you there. My business coach at the time, sales coach, he said to me, you realize this is all your fault. It was, I don't know, probably late '09. And I was so angry at him, so hurt and so angry that he said that to me. Because I was like, I cared so much. What do you mean it's my fault? It's absolutely not my fault. Do you not see that the whole country is going through this financial crisis? And it took me a long time to understand what he was saying to me. And that is that if, as a leader, you don't take 100% responsibility and accountability, you have no control. And so long as I was handing the control of my business over to the economy, to this crisis, then I was just a victim of it. Yes, it was having an impact on my world, but my inability to know what to do, the fact that I froze, the fact that I didn't admit quickly to other people, this is what's happening. How do I navigate this? Help me. I created a big mess for myself. And now I can say it was 100% my fault that we got in that situation. I didn't know what to do. I totally froze. I was very defensive of my response for a very long time. And I'm grateful that he loved me enough to say those very hard words to me. And I'm grateful that my personality doesn't write people off. And so I still stayed in his orbit in spite of the fact that I was so angry at him. And over time, I understood what he meant, and he was right.
I think it's really cool that you can admit, I think we've all been there, where you just freeze and you're just not sure what to do. How did you pick yourself back up and keep moving?
It took a very long time, a very long time. I just kept saying, I just have to do one day. And if I can do one day and stay alive one day, then I'll do another day. I think it's the vantage point that people tell you when you're recovering from an addiction or something. It's like looking far was an impossibility. And so my worldview got very small. It was about surviving one day, making a partial payment to somebody that I owed money to, about returning 3 phone calls and at least owning my integrity, at making 15 sales calls because we had to have revenue. It was not this miracle switch where it's and then we got this $2 million contract and it was no big deal. It was totally fine. And I was so glad I stayed in business. It was not like that at all. It was years of slugging through, figuring it out. We made some bets on HubSpot that paid off, but that stuff was later, 3-4 years later. The getting the business even, it was just, I hated it. I hated every bit of it, but it made me very strong. And I'm scared of a lot less because of it. And I think I needed that. And then when we went through the COVID situation, I felt like it was my time to redeem my leadership in crisis. And it was darn near pitch perfect the way that we navigated that. It was incredible. And yes, there was still impact in our business, but the speed at which, as a leadership team, we responded, the speed at which we created as much clarity as we could for our team, the urgency and frequency by which we communicated with them what we did know, the speed at which I activated my network to understand, what are you seeing? What's going on here? What is these PPP dollars? What's happening? Getting different sources of information so that I could make the right call for our business. I was like, this time I'm not freezing. I might get my decisions wrong, but I'm not freezing. And I think that juxtaposition of those two experiences, we cut everybody's salary within 5 days of knowing what was happening as a way to extend our run rate. We were like, I don't know if this is for 3 weeks, for 6 weeks, or for 6 months. I don't know. But we're going to give you the information that we have. We're going to show you the numbers that we have. Right now, we feel like our best move is to protect I didn't use the word family, but to protect the herd. That's what we believe is the right thing right now based on what we see. But it was nobody knew. We'd never lived through a pandemic. We didn't know what was happening. We didn't know how quickly it was all going to unfold. We didn't understand what industries were going to thrive in it. And that was one of the questions we asked ourselves in the first week is, who's going to win in this economy? Who's going to win based on what we see coming? How do we position ourselves in those industries? We were asking ourselves, how do we win even now, instead of let's wait until all the dust settles and then figure out how to plow our way through the mess. And we just stayed ahead of it. But we reinstated salaries sooner than we thought we were going to. We ended up giving some bonus back because the PPP dollars we received, we made people whole to the extent that we could, but we at least were we need the longest runway possible to make the best decision possible for the long-term viability of the organization and everybody's jobs. So that was like our rally cry in the first 4 to 6 weeks as we were seeing what was happening. It was our redemption round, my personal redemption round.
And I think one thing that's cool is I don't know if you notice it, but when you first start talking about oh wait, you use I a lot. And the moment you started flipping to talking about COVID, you
Mhm.
started using we a lot.
Mhm.
And one of the things you mentioned in earlier was asking for help. I mean, this job, this role in a big company, in a growing firm can be really, really isolating. And particularly during tough times or tough
Mhm.
decisions. When did you start to develop that ability to take from the isolation and also ask for help?
Such a powerful observation, Matt. I'd be curious in your own journey if you've always been a we person. I think
No.
again, yeah, I think there's like this, it's what I know. There's like this founder bravado of like, you have to have a certain amount of individual moxie to like break from the pack. And for a
Yeah.
while, you kind of are alone, actually. So there's
Yeah.
no even proverbial we. It's like actually you.
Right.
And you have like this thing in your head, this vision, and you kind of make friends with it. And you have to almost become strangely obsessive about it to get yourself through all of the like obvious reasons not to do it that everybody's telling you about. I think I moved my partnership to like this idea, this identity, this ego, this win, this like proving myself to myself and anybody else that was watching and everybody in my high school class kind of thing. And I actually don't hate all of that. If I were hiring somebody, I'm like, I like a little of that. I like a little, I'll bet on me. But I think as a team started growing, I didn't know how to share the load. And for me, just enough stuff had to break for me to say, I don't know how to do this. I need to create thoughtful guardrails, direction, core values, a cone, a sandbox in which we play in. And inside of that, you guys get to just go solve what you know how to do. And I think that I became less of somebody who was driving the remote control and more of like an actual leader and being comfortable with the risk of other people making decisions and choices and starting to see that, holy crap, they're actually a lot better than me at this stuff. And I think you go from realizing you're not good at everything to then I think I had to re-own, but I am really good at some things. And I need to make sure that I keep hold of those things I'm really good at.
Oh, yeah. I think, too, for all of us, and you mentioned it, I have not always been a we person. But when you finally have the opportunity to look at yourself clearly in the mirror and see everything, and it
Mhm.
usually takes for a lot of us, for me, it was I had a business that totally failed. And picking up the pieces of my ego and life after that allowed me to see what was important in that true
Mhm.
reflection of me in the mirror. It sounds like you getting through that period after your freezing and how you dealt with that help clear up your own self reflection and really see your core person. And that's what it did for me and who I wanted to be as well. So it's not just who I was, but who I knew I should and could
Mhm.
be. And that's where I've grown as a leader is being able to actually look at that. And part of it is being okay asking for help. It's not something that I'm good at. I'm getting better.
Yeah, and I think realizing you don't have to fight alone. Like,
Right.
I think it comes from a good place a lot of times of wanting to protect people from the hard stuff, wanting to take on the most gnarly stuff yourself, not because you want it, but because you don't want to have other people go through it. Somebody told me, or I started to see that I'm robbing them of a lot of growth and a lot of personal satisfaction and a lot of understanding of their own capabilities when I'm always taking the gnarliest stuff. Stop already.
Let's take this a step further. I'm going to assume that Element 3 went through a period of pretty significant growth between '08 and the pandemic.
Mhm.
And you brought in people that were also better at helping, just better at certain things of running your company than you were. You still have things that,
Mhm.
like you said, you are uniquely good at and probably uniquely enjoy.
Mhm.
But you reached a point too where you selected and really found somebody to help you run the day to day of the business. That's
Mhm.
a tough thing because it's your baby and your organization. Talk about transitioning into more of that kind of CEO type role and finding somebody to help run the day to day of Element 3.
Yeah, so I'll answer this in 2 parts. We run on EOS. I would say I innately knew how to grow a business. The sales and revenue, marketing, brand building part is pretty intuitive to me. Yes, there's disciplines behind those that are like, but that part comes very naturally to me. The building the operational infrastructure so that growth has really solid platform to build off of was less obvious to me. And so, yes, we went through a period of time where we were growing a ton. I had whispers of operational looking things inside of the business, mostly financial controls, less true operational controls, process, onboarding, training, all that kind of stuff, productizing our services, those kinds of motions that we have in place now. And I think the business would be probably $10 million bigger today had I hired, in the EOS language, an integrator 5 years before I did. We're 5 years into our journey. And I think if we would have done it 5 years before that, which is probably really when we needed it, I think we'd be $10 million bigger. I remind myself often that I paid a lot of money for this lesson. So, one is if you're more of a revenue sales minded person, brand builder, like I'm naturally built, you've got to find your operational equal and you have got to empower them with managing your P&L, like running the P&L and L and running the thing. So that's one thing I did 5 years ago, put an integrator in place, learned how to trust that individual. I've had 2 people now sit in that seat, share culture, figure out how you work together. And then right almost 2 years ago, I put a president in place who runs the day to day, like you were saying, that he is the executive leadership team reports to him. He's making updates to our strategy. He's working on some org chart and accountability chart pivots and changes. He does most the comp structure development. Like he is running the business. Getting to a place where I was 16 years in, 17 years in, I learned that I am just a starter. I am great at the beginning. I'm great when there's no guardrails, when it's kind of a hot mess, when it's the most risky, when you just need somebody to go test their face off, jump into a pool, figure out what happens. I'm like really good at that. And as we are now in a scale up, like we're decidedly not startup, that's much less entrepreneurial. They send me on like special projects and like things to go do. But for the most part, the day to day, Kyler is running it. And we transitioned that very slowly. It took us both probably a year of working on that transition to both feel really comfortable with the choice. We're working towards this. We did not tell the company, we did not tell anyone except for our head of talent that we were working on that transition. I tested him in different ways with not being at some meetings, letting him present some things, work on business plan, and see if he could bring me ideas, change, evolution, next steps that were totally outside of anything I could think of. Because I knew that's what I needed, not somebody who was like waiting for me to come up with the stuff. And so then after we announced it to the organization, it was about a 6-month transition from there. And about 3, 4 months ago, I think at the beginning of the year, I stopped attending the weekly leadership team meetings. It's again, because it's an operational meeting. It's not a vision casting meeting. It's not,
Right.
it's an I still attend the quarterly offsites. So it took us 18 months to get there where it was like, hey, I'm an accessory in this meeting. If anything, people get confused about who's making the call, and that's not like good for anybody. And so I was like, I think it's just time for me to not be here. You can call me if you need me for something, but you probably don't. So it's given him a chance to really learn. I mean, he wants to know, can I run a business? He doesn't want me breathing down his neck. The team wants to know who's really in charge, and they want to know that we are aligned. Your kids want to know that your parents are aligned. His job is to stay on the same page. And I was lucky enough to be able to make him a financial partner in the business. So we're super aligned and it's great. I think it's gone so well because we were very thoughtful and very measured. We were willing to go slow. But then once it was decided, it was done.
I think that's really cool. And that's the hard and vulnerable thing for a lot of people that kind of take on the leadership role is being able to hand off some of it and step away.
Yeah, he asked me last week. I've been working on some other projects. I've used as if anybody follows me on the internet. And he's like, "So if that stuff like doesn't work, is your plan to like come back into the agency with more hours?" And I was like, "I can't see your body language. Do you want me to?" He's like, "Do you want to?" And I said, "Do you want me to?" He's like, "Not really." I was like, "Yeah, that's great. I don't really see where I would sit." So I love that he can say that to me. Like, "Are you going to be all up in my business if you don't have this other stuff to work on?" Like, no, I won't. I'll find other things to do. I promise.
So he's
So
really rooting on you to in the next
yeah,
phase of your career.
that's right. That's right. I was like, I'll go. I got lots of stuff I can go do. Don't worry. I'll be here as you need me. I'm involved in the places they want me. He's got some specific objectives that he hands me each year, but like he is driving me and it's great. We work great together.
Well, I think that's really cool. So I don't want to step away and end this without hearing about your next entrepreneurial journey, because I think it's how you and I met. And
Mhm.
it's such a cool addition to the landscape of leadership and working parents. Tell us more about that.
I started a podcast 4 years ago called Scared Confident, and it was really beginning to rebuild. It's 2024 now. It was like rebuilding after COVID. We had a baby, our 4th daughter. You led through COVID too. There was like this like warrior status that you had to have as a leader. There was no space or pool for your own emotions, reactions. There just wasn't. You had to just keep managing through things and be present and strong. And I think that was the right behavior. But I came out of that very tired and very depleted and very confused. And when I'm in that, fear takes a real hold on my mindset and the way I view myself in the world. And so I started the podcast really as a way to like kind of work my own shit out. And in that, I started to really realize, my husband and I, our marriage went through some really tough times about 6, 7 years ago. My business went through some really hard times in that same season. And I started to see I was really just kind of reacting to life. I wasn't driving it anymore. And I needed to learn how to become the chief operating officer of our household as well. And so as we've rebuilt our lives, as we rebuilt our marriage, as we rebuilt our priorities, as I rebuilt what gets my time, I've learned a lot in that process. I've just launched the Life of And Academy, and the purpose of it is to help two career families in particular move from chaos to connection, move from this reactive state of living to a proactive posture towards your life so that you're still a customer of your life. I was like, I don't want to hand in my life for 20 years and be like, I'm just going to drive kids around and I'm going to be tired and I'm going to be grumpy and I'm going to feel like I don't have any time for the things and people and adventures. I'm like, that is such a huge percentage of my life. I'm not going to accept that as an outcome. We kind of talked about being an entrepreneur and saying like, well, how would I if I could? And so I started asking that question. If I could live my life not tired, how would I do that? If I could live my life both being a mom of 4, a wife to a man that I love desperately, a business that is successful, developing leaders, mentoring, investing, being a board member, if I were to figure out how to do those things, how would I? And I don't want to give up my health. I don't want to give up my sleep. I don't want to give up my marriage. I don't want to give up relationships with my kids. I don't want to give up the ability to be financially successful. So, how do I live a life of and inside of those priorities, inside of those values, inside of those boundaries for myself? It's been a process of trial and error over the last 6 years. And I have a lot of people ask me how we do it all. And we are by no means a perfect family, but I do feel like we are a peaceful, connected family. And so I want to be able to share that gift with others like your family that are navigating 2 career households. We work hard to create opportunities for ourselves and for our families. And I think sometimes we're sacrificing things we don't mean to. So that's what it's all about.
One of the things that I think is so important that I learned from reading your stuff is just being intentional. And I think sometimes we really forget that in business, we focus so much on being intentional. And yet in our personal lives, sometimes we're riding on the train rather than driving it. And I think there's a cool spot for that. So thank you for sharing it. Thank you for joining us today. Before we wrap up, though, you actually hit on this early. You totally read the last page of this book very early on in the podcast. But I'd love for you to answer this question. What is one piece of advice that you would give yourself today when you were first starting out?
Believe your intuition. It is hard to explain and defend sometimes, but believe your intuition and use that as a place to begin interrogating facts and reality. That's the advice I would give myself.
Oh, I love that. Well, thank you. And with that, we will close out this episode. Tiffany, thanks again for joining the episode. Thanks so much for listening. After the First Million is presented by Decimal. To listen to more episodes and find tips to help make running a business easier, visit decimal.com/AFM. Want to join the conversation? Reach out to me on LinkedIn and let's explore the messy middle.